So, we come to the third point. The third point is all that I have said to you is brought to us daily. And I say us here in Ottawa, 2019, and all over the world, all over the history of the world, whenever a priest says Mass. Whenever a priest says Mass, all these intentions of our Lord, all that love, the love of the Blessed Trinity squeezed in a human heart called a Sacred Heart. All the love of God is in that one human heart, beating out of love for us. I need to be baptized of a baptism of blood. I came to put fire on earth. He must have been, dying every moment. When will I die for them? I can't wait. It's like when you have to, the day of your wedding, when you woke up the day of your wedding. Probably, I don't know, did you sleep that night? Tomorrow I'm getting married, tomorrow I'm getting married, tomorrow. For us, it's becoming a priest. We're counting the minutes. Tick-tock, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, getting married, or you're becoming a priest, We're counting them in. Well, our Lord, it was like this. Because his death on the cross is his espousal with us. The total gift. Isn't that what Father Grun told you when he spoke about marriage? This sacrament is great. I say this of Christ and of the church. And so that supreme act of love on the cross is the model of married life, the model of priestly life, the model of children for adults, the model of everybody's life. There it is on that cross. So all that love, all these intentions of our Lord, of every second of his passion and of his life, are squeezed in a sacrament called the Holy Eucharist. And we cannot go back in time, but God has power over time and over space. We can fly across the world. You can get in a plane and go to Tokyo and go to Sydney. Yes, you can do that. But we cannot fly back in time. You get in a plane and land in 1930. That's it. They do that in movies, but we can't do that. But God can fly into the future. And that is the Mass. And that is the priesthood. And so that is going to be inserted. That is going to be signified. That is going to be expressed under all these signs that we have at the Mass. Whether it is going to be the vestments of the priest. Did you ever read the prayers the priest says when he puts on the vestment? That would be a good preparation for Mass. The amice, which is the helmet of salvation. The white alb, may I be bathed in the blood of the Lamb. May completely washed in the blood of our Lord. The cincture of chastity. The maniple of good works. I have to sow into tears in order to harvest into joy, with joy. So our Lord says, it's hard for a mother to have a baby, but when the baby is born, you forget your sorrows. You're so happy. You're holding your baby. That was worth it. And then the stole of innocence. Stole also means a robe. And the chasuble, read the chapter in the Imitation of Christ in book 4, I think it's chapter 4 or 5, where it describes, when the priest puts on the stole, sometimes there's a pillar in front, and often there's a cross at the back of the stole, the chasuble. When the priest puts on the chasuble, it's like Jesus taking his cross. And what did Jesus do when he took his cross? He walked up to Calvary. When the priest puts on the chasuble, he goes up to the altar. That's the only place he wears a chasuble. Okay, it's related to the Mass. So we have the vestments of the priest. We have the altar, the whole mystery of the altar. One day, if we continue these talks another year, God knows, okay, we might have, I'd like to show you, perhaps we could look at the consecration of a church, a video of the consecration of a church, and all the mysteries involved in a Catholic altar and then in a Catholic church. It's extraordinary. But all this means a lot of things. It's very symbolic, always related to the Passion or something connected with the Passion. St. Thomas says everything in the Mass either signifies the Passion or the Church, the mystical body, or is there for practical reasons, like 3 layers of cloth to absorb the precious blood in case it spills. An old priest can knock down the chalice. It happens occasionally. So the double consecration is a sign of that sacrifice. And well, I could mention it here. I think you have all the 30 crosses the priest makes during the Mass. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. The Mass begins with a cross and ends with the blessing, with a cross. The last Gospel was added later on by St. Pius V. But the Mass begins with a cross, finishes. The Mass is the cross. Did I tell you of this this PhD in Paris, a lady who had no religion. She was pagan. And one day, she got the inspiration, you should be having a religion like everybody else. I said, yeah, maybe I should. And so she was a smart lady. She started going to different churches. She looked at the phone book or internet, whatever. That's not too long ago, maybe 20 years ago. And she started going to different churches, just watch as a professor, highly intellectual, analyzing what they do and so on. And she ended up one day walking in our church of St. Nicholas in Paris. Beautiful music, 1,000 people at Mass, polyphonic choir, Gregorian chant, massive organs. She's very impressed. But what literally hit her was not primarily that, but something at the sermon. And she said, that's strange. She watched it and said, that's very strange. She came back the next Sunday to see if it was going to happen again. And the next Sunday, and after, 3, 4 Sundays, she was so piqued by curiosity, she had to go and ask the priest, why at the beginning of the sermon do you make a sign of the cross? And why do you do one at the end of the sermon? It's that simple sign of the cross. How many times in a day you make a sign of the cross? A sign of the cross of the priest before his sermon converted a PhD in the 1980s, 1990s. The grace hit her through the sign of the cross. It's extraordinary, the cross. The cross is everything. But let me mention here too, because it's something, as you know, I have a passion for the Holy Shroud. The Holy Shroud, and maybe I've told you, but let me repeat it to you here as part of this connection between the Mass and the Passion. In a nutshell, it's been proven now scientifically that the Holy Shroud was one of the cloth of the Last Supper. The Last Supper was a square U table, a triclinium, and the Holy Shroud was a long cloth of one of the legs of the U. And perhaps, Dr. Jackson says, could be, from some signs, perhaps it was the part where our Lord was sitting, because there's a rank in sitting at all the tables, like in our homes. Where does mom sit? Dad sits? Where does the priest sit when you invite him at home? There's position of dignity. Well, the first seat in a U-shaped table is at one end of the U. And so, and how, in a nutshell, how does Dr. Jackson prove that the shroud was one of the cloth of the Last Supper? By a series of, at least, mainly two things. A series of five set of stains on one side of the cloth, which are a Jewish sauce, which is called a chasoret, that he used to dip. Remember at one moment when they ask who is going to betray you, and John asks our Lord, and our Lord says, the one to whom I will give the dipped bread. He takes a piece of bread, he dips it in the sauce, and gives it to Judas. So there was a sauce. It's part of the Jewish, it's a mixture of wine, grape, and nuts. What am I saying? No. Wine, apple, and nuts. Okay, a mixture of these three. So, and there are 5 sets of stains on the cloth. And the other argument that is used, because the question is, what is that doing there? And the other argument to show that the shroud was used at the Last Supper is the band, the strip of cloth all across the shroud, which nobody, until Dr. Jackson, has been able to explain adequately, properly. Nobody knows why a piece was cut the whole length of the shroud. Okay, it's like this is the shroud. There's a piece like 4 inches cut all the way across, and then it was sewn back almost immediately on the shroud. So why did they cut it? And the answer is, I jump back now on Good Friday afternoon, after Jesus has died on the cross. Joseph and Nicodemus go to ask the centurion if they can have the body. And the centurion said, you better ask Pontius Pilate. And Pilate goes and asks the centurion. Centurion has to go to Pilate. Can we have the body? And so the Pilate says, okay, you can have the body. Pontius Pilate says, you can have the body. But by the time Pilate said you can have the body, it was getting late. I mean, it takes time back and forth, at least 3 times to the Calvary, 700 meters, and walking or on horseback. Anyway, shops are closed. And so Jesus, Joseph, and Nicodemus said, we need to wrap him into something. So they just went to the cenacle, grabbed one of the cloths, went back to Calvary, to the sepulchre, but the Jewish custom was not simply to wrap the body in a cloth, but also to tie the body with some strips. If you had to go to a shop, somebody died, you don't buy a coffin in these days, you would buy the shroud and the strips to tie the shroud. But since this was not a shroud, but this was a tablecloth, they didn't have the strips. So one pull out his Swiss knife, I don't know, and cut a band across the shroud. And Dr. Jackson did that, and it works. Tied the feet, and then goes around the body and tie under the chin. Because the feet are straight, so something holds the cloth there. And later on Easter Sunday, they found the shroud tied up, but nobody inside. So John saw and believed. And later on, when they took the shroud back home, one of the holy ladies, perhaps Our Lady, stitched the piece back where it had been cut. So, these 2 reasons, the set of stains, the 5 set of stains of chasoret, and that band, leads Dr. Jackson to conclude this is one of the cloth of the Last Supper. So we have signs of the Last Supper. we have sign of the passion. We have all the marks of the scourging. We have the crown of thorns. We have the wounds. So he was crucified. The man in that shroud corresponds to what is in the gospel. So we have Holy Thursday, and we have Good Friday. And we even have the blood that came out of the heart wound after he was laid flat, because that blood trickled at the back. So it could only trickle at the back if he was flat, because the blood went horizontally. It didn't come down. So he had to be lying on his back. It's in the sepulcher. And then we also have the discoloring of the threads, like a yellowing of the threads caused by the flash of the resurrection. So that cloth, which is represented by the altar cloth that we have on the altars, that shroud is to this day, because as I told you, we see remnants of the Last Supper, of Good Friday, and of Easter Sunday. That cloth, the altar cloth we have on our altars, represents the Holy Shroud. Imagine saying the Mass on the burial cloth of your father, of your mother, of your son, stained with blood. Imagine if there is a martyr in Vietnam, Jean-Charles Cornet, one of the first Vietnamese martyrs, 1837. A young man, a very, very strange life. He was sent to Vietnam as a deacon. He was not even a priest yet. But the ship was leaving. And in 1831, 32, not too many ships went from France to Vietnam. And so anyway, his superior says, listen, Reverend Cornet, you get on the ship, just go. We'll get a bishop to ordain you in Vietnam sometime. And so he went to Vietnam. Actually, he was supposed to go to Tibet. So he got into Vietnam, and he said, well, I'm not going to learn the language because I have to learn Tibetan language. I'm not going to strain myself to learn Vietnamese. I'm not supposed to be here. But then persecution broke out. He had to hide in a cave. He had an eye disease. He could barely see at the end. And then he was hiding, and they caught him, and they executed him. He never went to Tibet. And so he's the first martyr of Vietnam, and he says, well, I'm not supposed to be here, but here I am, okay? Anyway, he had a horrible death, horrible martyrdom. Well, martyrdom is not usually nice, but his was particular. They had a carpet, and they cut him in pieces like you cut a sausage, okay? He was cut into pieces on that carpet, full of his blood. Later on, the Christians who saw that, I don't know if they paid the soldiers, they managed to recuperate the carpet. They sent that to his parents in France. If you go to Paris, you can see that carpet. It's not very big, about 3 by 4, but that has happened for real. Imagine you, parents, receiving a bloody carpet where your son has been martyred, shed his blood for Christ. Imagine that. Well, the Mass, when we say Mass, is not a bloody carpet of a martyr. It's the shroud. It's symbolic, but it's there. The shroud that Jesus was buried in. Where he said on which he said the first Mass, and you can see the connection between the Last Supper and Calvary, it's the same sacrifice. So the Last Supper, the first Mass, then the whole shedding of the blood from the agony till Good Friday afternoon, and then the resurrection on Easter Sunday. That cloth, if that cloth could speak, and it does speak in its ways, it's a living witness of the passion, death, and resurrection of our Lord. So, the Holy Shroud is stored, and all this is there in the Mass. So when you see the priest so many times during the Mass, the priest bows down and kisses the altar. He kisses the relics, yes, but the relics are covered by this cloth. And so when we know what the Holy Shroud is and the link between the cloth and the Holy Shroud, so we can think when we kiss the altar, we're also kissing the shroud, kissing the relics of the martyrs, and kissing the shroud that enveloped the body of our Lord, dead and risen.